think everybody's just about there. Let's go ahead and introduce our fourth speaker tonight. He's been in the club since June of 2007. He's a professional speaker, as some of you know. He's working on speech number 6 in the Competent Communicator Manual. And the first Saturday of every December, for the last 10 years, this gentleman has led the Briefcase Brigade in the annual Children's Hospital of Atlanta Christmas Parade. It's considered the #1 act in the parade, and you can check out some of the YouTube videos on his website, www.martymercer.com. Let's welcome Marty Mercer.
Keith, how long do you think it would take for this can of pork and beans to explode if I threw it into that fire? Keith thought he was like some sort of CIA undercover guy in the Cold War. He looked left, he looked right, he slowly looked at me and he said, I can't believe you just asked me that. I was thinking the same exact thing. Two of us sat next in the grassy area next to the in-ground fire pit where the coals were beginning to form nicely for dinner. We began to plot our famous Boy Scout physics experiment. Good evening, fellow Toastmasters, welcome guests, and especially any former Boy Scouts or physics majors. Now, the Boy Scout law says that a Boy Scout should be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And yes, I can still remember that. I see your eyes. Tonight I'm going to talk about how Keith and I exhibited those 12 Scout laws in just a slightly different way than Lord Baden-Powell, the founder of the Boy Scouts, had planned. Now here's the scene. Camp Rainy Mountain in far northeast Georgia, up in Clayton, right on the North Carolina border. We'd come up from Tampa to go canoeing in the Chattooga River. Same river that Burt Reynolds and John Voight had paddled in the movie Deliverance. We had a picture postcard perfect campsite. This beautiful grassy meadow area. Our tents set up over by the tree line. About 100 yards away over here up a gentle sloping hill was where the adults and the scout leaders were camping. We'd spend all day canoeing and shooting the rapids, and we'd come back to begin cooking dinner and lighting our fire. Keith and I had divided the boys up into what scouts call patrols, groups of about 8 to 10 boys, and they had all their tents in one little area, and they had their own cooking fire. We were the oldest boys, so we were known as the senior patrol leaders. Key point there is leader. It was our job to instill in these young scouts all the virtues of the Scout Law. So we decided to teach them the Scout Laws through a simple lesson of physics. We decided to show the 12 Scout Laws by taking an unopened can, Campbell's pork and beans, and throwing it into the fire. We thought we were being helpful to those young boys by teaching them what bravery really meant. Our definition of bravery was, how long can we sit next to that fire with that boiling and pressurizing can ready to explode before we ran off to safety before it exploded in our face. Keith and I were loyal to each other. We shook hands on that. We weren't going to leave either one of us by the fire. And we were trustworthy. We took a solemn oath. We were not going to rat either one of us out. Well, as the fire began bubbling on the can, you could begin to hear water in the inside, the fluid beginning to boil. We dropped a drop of water on it. The water evaporated instantly. And suddenly we began to hear a strange sound, this high, delicate, kind of like a tea kettle would make, except this can had no holes punched in it. That was when our little young underlings began creeping up to the fire to see what was going on around the fire. That's when Keith and I knew we had to show some leadership. This was a dangerous area. So in a very kind and friendly manner, we suggested that they show some obedience and move away about 25 yards to a safe area. Suddenly the can jumped around in the fire. It was getting hotter and hotter, and the pressure was building up. And the last few remaining scouts, who were still peering intently at the can, cheerfully on their own, changed their minds and moved in a thrifty manner over to the safe spot. Suddenly, the sounds that we had heard a moment ago had turned to rage and anger. The coals and the ashes in the fire pit were dancing about in anticipation of what was to come. Smoke was billowing out of his can, and there were out of the seams. And that's when I looked at Keith, he looked at me, and we both realized, what have we done? The smirks and mischievous smiles from just a few moments ago had now turned to panic and remorse. What could we do? What could we do? The can was too hot. We couldn't pick it up. We didn't have any gloves. We thought about a shovel, but we didn't think we had the coordination to get the shovel and go into the fire pit to get the can out. It might blow up in our face. What were we going to do? Suddenly my life flashed in front of me. I thought about, I always had wanted to drive my parents' car without them in it. I'd always wanted to take Sally Johnson to the movies. And there I looked over at Keith, the son of a Methodist mother and a Jewish father, and he had this strange reverent prayer going on, some kind of dear Lord Jesus at Wailing Wall. Suddenly, I heard Keith yell, "Run for your lives!" And he pushed me, we went running, we dove behind the tents. And suddenly this atomic hydrogen neutron bomb that sounded like it would cut off the top of Rainy Mountain. Kaboom! We were laying there behind the tents with our hands over our head. We looked up, and this rain shower of ash and wood and charcoal and tin can shrapnel and overcooked pork and beans were falling down all around us. And then we heard something even more terrifying. We heard the sounds of Keith's father, the scoutmaster, and my dad at the top of the hill, running down the hill, yelling, "Newberger! Mercer!" And we were like, why do they think we're involved? We're the senior patrolliers. Why couldn't some of these young kids have been the ones behind this dastardly deed? Well, Keith and I knew what our gig was up. We got prepared. That's the scout motto, is be prepared. We prepared ourselves to walk up the hill to where the adults were to take the consequences of our actions. And as we walked by that small little fire pit, that was now a very big crater. We couldn't help but laugh at the power of one small unopened can of pork and beans in 15 minutes of a fire. So there you have it. 11 of the 12 traits of the Scout Law. We learned the last lesson, perhaps the most important lesson, for the rest of that week. The lesson is, if you plan to play with fire in an unopened can of pork and beans, be prepared to spend the rest of the week clean. Adam Toastmaster.